Hey, you are now listening to the Graceway Podcast. Let's talk.
Well, hello, everybody. Jeff Adams here, and it is time for Let's Talk. I'm sitting here next to Pastor Tim Dunn, and wow, Pastor Tim, another profound message. And I don't know, it seems like these last couple of weeks especially, you have been touched personally by the content of what you're doing. Maybe not everybody would see that, but I know you.
Yeah.
And I can just see those wheels turning. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, I think anytime you're thinking through things like how does God use pain, how does God use power, people come into your mind, seasons come into your mind, and stories that God has led you through come into your mind. So
yeah. Well, it's interesting. All of my life, I've heard people preach and teach on Joseph.
Sure.
Who is, and you mentioned this. I know you don't just disagree with this. He's one of the most beautiful pictures of Jesus in the Bible.
Yep.
But here's what I think that I noticed this morning listening to you. I think we see that so clearly and have preached that so completely that we see Jesus in Joseph to the point that we almost confuse the two.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Jesus ain't Joseph.
Sure. Sure, yeah.
And that was one of the things that you did this morning. You put flesh on his bones.
Yeah.
And even though there's no, he has this squeaky clean image in the minds of Bible commentators.
Yeah, right.
And preachers.
Yeah.
But what you did is you read between the lines, you looked inside the cracks today, and you put flesh on his bones.
Yeah.
And you caught me, and I think everybody, off guard.
Really?
Yeah, because, you've been telling us for weeks now, let's look for Jesus in the Bible.
Yeah.
And you kind of pulled the rug out from under us.
did.
And this guy's one of the best pictures of Jesus. Now, let me tell you what a freak he was.
Well, that's the interesting thing about it, right? And there's all kinds of debate on pictures, types, numerology, blah, 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 blah. But, sometimes we lose the humanity of these individuals in the midst of it. And, I'm always fascinated by that. And then that God would use this guy to picture Jesus.
Yeah.
I think that putting skin on somebody's story makes the types and pictures more powerful, not less. So,
I agree with that. I think that's a great way to look at that. One thing that was going through my mind, this was one of those Sundays where some Sundays you're spinning a tale.
Yeah.
And you're taking us along on this journey, and then you conclude, therefore.
Right.
And today's message was one of those where there are any number of quotes that I would like to write down in my journal.
Sure.
You were dropping deep bombs on us all the way through. And so I guess my question for you, in light of that, there's just so much here.
Yeah.
What would be your major takeaways from what you talked about this morning? Anybody that's listened to the message today, I think they understand what I'm talking about. It's like, oh, me, oh, my. But what's the major takeaways for Pastor Tim, or what would you recommend be our major takeaways?
Yeah, it's interesting. Joseph, Abraham and Jacob, the rhythm's a little easier to find because of that chiasmic thing. You can, Joseph, he gets that dream at the beginning, and then it's, 0 to 60 until the end. I think the thing that's really interesting to me is the way that God used circumstances to season him, appear to season him, I should say. Mm-hmm. The amount of profound pain this man, actually this boy and then this man would have suffered. And to watch, on one hand, Moses, through the Holy Spirit, doesn't let us see any of the complaints or the wrestling or any of him trying to fight through that. You just see the high points of him growing as a man, growing as a leader, growing in his faith of this covenant God that he had probably heard of. And I think it's just, the dude has family issues. The guy's falsely accused of a felony, He's up and down the class, he's a slave, then he's second to Pharaoh. And I think just to watch the invisible hand of God, if that makes sense, throughout his story. And that's one of the things, like you say he's such a pure type of Jesus, and of course he is. But for me, it's more helpful. The types are great, and I
Sure.
love them. But it's more helpful to see, you have Joseph's story at the front of the screen, and to see God in the shadows, kind of moving things. And I think that makes sense to me. That resonates with me more than this guy's a perfect type of Jesus.
And that's what caught my attention. Here's a guy that, as far as we know, he didn't do drugs.
Didn't appear to.
He didn't hang around with wild women. In fact, he resisted
Ran,
the
yeah.
opportunity. And he wasn't smashed drunk all the time.
Right.
But yet what you did is you pulled back the screen a little bit to show us that his problem was not as much the out-and-out sins as
Right.
it was his attitudes.
Yeah, and you saw God. I think this is the comforting thing. You just saw God season those. You saw God in some ways in a violent way, and in other ways in pretty subtle ways. That at the end of his life, he is a completely different guy.
Yeah.
Does not put himself in the place of God. We're at the front of the stories, loving being the center of God's story, and he's a really fascinating guy. Has some pretty profound self-righteousness at the beginning of the story that God morphs, and these redemption stories. I'm a sucker for them just because there's so many things that I know that God has accomplished in my life, and so many things that I want God to continue to accomplish in my life. And my hope is that, I think that my story is here,
Mm-hmm.
henceforth, but my hope is if the people who are on this journey with me, like you had so many people who are here your whole tenure, feel like we watched our pastor become more gentle, more trusting, more faithful, we watched God change Tim. Not that he was some crazy person, some lunatic, some whatever when he first came, but we saw the hand of God in his life. What more can you ask for, right?
Yeah, I would hope people would see that after me being here for 33 years.
Yeah.
You've been here for 5.
Yeah.
And I have seen that. And you're very transparent, and you talk about struggles and stuff, but
Yeah.
I think that perhaps I, more than a lot of people, understand some of the pain that you've had to deal with.
Sure.
And your point this morning, that's what makes us
Yeah.
who God wants us to be,
That's
not
right.
necessarily who we want to be.
Yeah, that's right.
So generations, and when you were talking just now, my mind went back this morning where you gave us the examples of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah.
And all 3 of those guys were very imperfect.
Yeah.
But yet all of them, at the end of life, settled into this peaceful place of trust.
That's right.
Abraham offering up Isaac like, it's okay, I don't understand, I don't know how, God's going to take care of it. And Jacob, blessing the younger rather than the older, like, I know.
Right.
Yeah, and Joseph the same way.
Yeah.
You pointed out, instead of, all the other guys were idiots, and now the perfect type of Jesus comes along.
Right.
He was just as flawed as everybody else.
He was. Yeah, and I think, we've all had our fill of flannograph Christian heroes.
I love it.
I just don't think it's helpful, and I think that it takes away. There's only one perfect dude in the Bible. Let's not take any of the shine off of him, and let's acknowledge the type of people that God saw fit to use, and let's see ourselves in that. But we're all looking up at Jesus. Yeah. And it worries me whenever we even call like the Hall of Faith, mm-hmm. right? No. These were broken people that God did profound and sovereign things to bring them to a place of faith. Yeah. They don't have a cape in the closet, and just to be able to see God's hand in their story, so that we can see God's hand in our story, I think is an important thing.
Absolutely. This generational thing, you've been following that through Genesis. Speak into this, how should people today look at their own genealogy? Yeah. Past and future.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's important you look at, in the negative sense, at, Abraham lies about his wife, then Isaac does it, right? Like, there's all of these sins of the father that get passed down. And I do think that it's important for us to be able to humbly and kindly, in an honoring way, acknowledge that we have inherited some baggage, and to know what that baggage is. I think that it's kind of one of the first steps toward redemption around those things. So I would always say to people, go to counseling, have mentors, be transparent, know what it is that you're dealing with. And then, I always want to be a part of my family tree that, I want to have good fruit after me, right? I want to, whatever is broken in my family tree, I want to be, as to the best of my ability and by God's grace, I want it to stop with me. So Ash and I both come from broken homes, and one of our big things was, man, by God's grace, God's going to sustain our marriage, and we want to stop that legacy in our.
Oh, that's good.
And so we have a handful of things like that. As big as that, and as small as, I don't miss my kids' games, right? I don't. Our agreement is, you come listen to me preach, I'll come watch you play.
Yeah.
Me trying to orient myself in support and care, and that's not a big thing, but it's a family tree thing. And so I think one is just think in generations. The Bible talks in generations. Our culture doesn't, but the Bible does. Acknowledge the good and the bad of what came before. Acknowledge your stewardship of the generation that you're in, and make, by God's grace, as many solid investments in reconciliation and redemption as you can, for the sake of, in my case, Noah, Emma, and Isaiah, my kids, and whatever they're going to be. In God's grace, I'm responsible for them right now. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great advice. Here at Graceway, we have some values,
Yeah.
and you were talking about that thing we call Growth Track.
Yep.
Where you learn to enjoy God, know Him,
Yeah.
and enjoy Him,
Right,
which I
right.
love that, and then find friends,
Yeah.
and then discover purpose and make a difference. So
Yeah.
you were getting into the purpose thing this morning, which
Yeah.
is getting into my field.
Yeah.
Since
It
I've
is.
retired as lead pastor,
Yeah.
I work with a lot of people, helping them through a process to discover their purpose. And you said something so very profound that I think it bears repeating, and I totally agree that discovering your purpose is not the end of the journey; it's
Yeah.
the beginning.
Right.
Speak to that.
Well, again, you kind of see Abraham. We don't know a ton about Isaac, but Jacob kind of get it later into the story. Abraham has already. I was thinking about this. Abraham leaves in faith his homeland, only to get the point later. It's such an interesting thing. Most of us require God to give us the punchline before we leave, but Abraham is unique in that way. But with Joseph, you see kind of this dream, this vision, this concept at the beginning, right? And I was thinking how many Christians don't have any language, don't have any perspective, don't have any idea of how important knowing your purpose is, and feel like, okay, now I know it, now I'm good. And there's kind of this period at the end of it, instead of, you're on the field now. Like, you literally just got your helmet, you just put your chin strap on, and it's just interesting to be able to watch Joseph. When he got that dream, like most of us, this is your purpose.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it's all about me.
Yeah, it's all about me, and it's like 1% of reality,
Yeah.
right? But what he got was true, and it was part of what God's plan, and you get to watch that unfold in his life. And I just wish that for many of us, we would have a greater belief in the promises of God, His plans and purposes for our life, and that we would see that it sends us on a direction. That's what it did with Joseph. And I imagine that Joseph, over time, began to say, oh, and was able to look back at that dream, that
Yeah.
purpose, that whatever. I think in the absence of that, a lot of Christians are just in the wind. We don't have any sense of why is this happening, what is this
Yeah.
connected to, and so you want people to have that, stones through the Jordan, or that staple in their life of, yeah, this is not good, this is not fun, but I can tie this back to a promise of God or to a vision or a purpose that God gave to me. And I'm not outside of that, so I'm still trusting that God has some things for me. You know, when I came here, I had done some work prior to where I was going to be a lead pastor. I first did work on if I was supposed to be a lead pastor, right? And, you know, my pastor and I went through 21 days of prayer, and the question was very simply, is Tim a lead pastor? Mm-hmm. You know, and Dr. Perry was like, yeah, sure, we'll pray through that. And I got done. I was like, yeah, I think I am. And he laughed in my face. He's like, yeah, that 21 days is for you. That was not. Yeah. Anyone who knows you would say that you are. But I needed that staple. Yeah. And then it was where and how and all of those kind of things. Yeah. And in the absence of that first 21 days, the second 21 days would have been a lot more confusing. Yeah. So once I had a sense of this is part of why God has put me on this planet, you know, I said to a buddy of mine the other day, I said no to 6 jobs. All good jobs, a COO, a teaching pastor, you know, blah, 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 blah. All of them had something that was outside of what I had heard from God. This is why I have you on the planet, or this is what's happening in this season. And in the absence of that, when all information is valid information, it can be pretty confusing. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm not sure I answered your question, but
yeah, I think you did. That was good. What I heard you say is that whether you understand your purpose up front or at the end, God does have a purpose. Yeah. And even if you know the purpose up front, it's still a plan of next steps. And what I heard you say about Joseph is the problem there, he gets the purpose up front, and then you think, okay, now I've got to get to work on that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And God's like, no, first you have to be sold into slavery. No, first you. But I would imagine, I obviously don't know because Scripture doesn't tell us, I would love to, you know, be able to spend eternity with him, say, okay, when did you know that God was still, that it was all connected? Right. And it wasn't right away. Right. But I wonder if at a certain point, maybe he's sitting in the jail cell and he's like, wait a minute, you know? And that's a really holy moment.
Yeah. I'm going to be here the rest of my life.
Yeah. No, I think that once it connected, then he was like, I'm not going to be here the rest of my life. It's just a question of when and how and all these kind of things. But I think that a lot of Christians, in the absence of a sense of calling or ministry or purpose, we have no grid by which to interpret circumstance. Yeah. And so every idea is a valid idea, a good idea, whatever, and we're just kind of chasing our own tail. Instead of going through a season, doing work with someone like you, and saying, why am I here, man? Why am I on this planet? And then making decisions through that grid. Yeah. And you know, the Bible doesn't let us know that Joseph did that, but you do. When you look at the end of his life, you say, oh, I can see why God had to do that and that and that and that and that. And the more clarity you can have in the midst of it, I think the more comfort. But God's going to do his thing regardless.
It's not his plan for us. It is his plan, period.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and we just take the next steps.
Yeah, we take the next
step.
You
and I talked just briefly after the first service, and for those that are watching us, you preached the same message twice on Sunday mornings. Right. Pretty much the same.
Yeah, pretty much.
as much as humanly possible. Sure. But we came up with a word, and we talked for maybe a minute, but it seems like everything was pointing to surrender. Yeah. And a word that you really didn't use more than once or twice in the message. Yeah. But
not in the first one, anyways.
Not in the first one, okay, which is the one that I heard. Yeah. But it seems like that's what it really comes down to.
Yeah. Again, right? I mean, you have Abraham surrendering with Isaac. You have Jacob surrendering. You know, when he's going back home, and again, you know, we love that, you know, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, and we put on coffee cups and all that kind of thing. Yeah, yeah. But there is there's an aha in there, I think, for him, of, okay, I think multiple things are falling into place. Yeah. But the verse before it is actually the one that got him there, when he says, when they're kind of like, hey, Dad said to not kill us. And he's like, what am I, God?
Yeah, what am I, God? Exactly.
Yeah, and that's actually the verse that we should put on the coffee cups.
Exactly. That's what interprets the next verse.
Absolutely. And that snot-nosed kid at the beginning of the story,
Yeah.
if you had said, what are you, God? He'd be
God
like,
must have made me to be special.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, I just chose you.
Yeah, I just chose you, man. Yeah, and so it's pretty fascinating to watch God morph him to that place, and that "What am I, God?" is a restful statement.
Yeah.
Right. Trying to play God is a devastatingly brutal thing to do.
It is. I don't want to jump into Exodus before you get there, but I've
Sure.
always been fascinated in the early chapters of Exodus. Moses is out in the desert, and all of a sudden this bush just burst into flames.
Right.
And there's millions of identical bushes out there.
Yeah.
So what was the difference? God was in that one.
That's
Why was he in that one and not another one? Because that one was available.
Yeah.
Not because it was any more special.
Yeah, that's
it's
right.
not that somebody sprinkled holy water on it. It was
Yeah.
just there.
That's the one.
Joseph,
Yeah.
Abraham, you, me.
Yeah.
We're just there, and God said, okay, take this next step.
Yeah, and I think I can hear all the theological. What are you saying? No, don't hear more than we're saying. We're saying he's just a guy.
Yeah,
He's just
exactly.
a guy. It was just a bush, but God brought this guy through a journey to ultimately bring him to a place of trust in who he was and in who God was.
A journey that had a lot of pain.
Had a lot of pain, but the reality of it is, and this is a very unpopular sentiment. Most of us are more like Joseph at the beginning than we would like to think.
Yeah.
And most of us need, obviously, sold into slavery and falsely accused. Not saying the specifics of it. We need valleys.
Mm-hmm.
We need valleys where God is big and we are small. We need valleys where God is wise and we are foolish. We need those experiences. We don't want them, but we shouldn't avoid them, because what they produce in us ultimately leads us to the place that not just that God wants us to be, but leads us to the place that your heart needs to be.
Yeah, you said something that I made note of as well, that when we're in the valley, the temptation is to stand on a mound and call it a mountain.
Yeah, right, yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well,
Speak into that.
I just think that our equilibrium's all off on this. We're trying so desperately to stay out of the valley. I'll take the long way to not have any hard seasons, and once I get in a hard season, I want to get out as quickly as possible. And what it does is it messes up the horizon, right? In our eyesight, that we think, this is it. This is the best that it is. And you hear this, right? You hear Christians running through their version of, this amazing thing that happened, and you say, yeah, I think God had more. I think God has more than that. I think there's a higher. The mountain is higher. The rest is deeper. The celebration is fuller. But because we're trying to stay out of them, we don't want to go too deep, and we think that doesn't affect how high we can go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mountain climbers have an expression they call a false horizon.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah,
We're I don't know whether in the Midwest we don't have a lot of mountains to climb, just mounds.
Yeah, just mountains.
But if you've ever climbed a real mountain,
Yeah.
it's such a temptation. You see, like, there it is, there's the peak, and then you get to that, and it's like, oh.
Yeah. And a lot of times what we do is I'll take the false one.
Yeah.
Because because I'm afraid to go up any
Yeah.
like there's a fear piece in that, but it just
Most definitely.
it's just interesting that mountains are mountains and valleys are valleys, and they're all part of our faith. So let God walk you through the valley, and then let him walk you to the mountain, but don't try to live on the mountain. That is a very American value, and you and I have talked about this a lot. Just the insistence on abundance and comfort and happiness and all those kind of things that keep us away from the goodness in the valley, but also keep us away from the actuality of the mountain that God intends to provide for us.
And you paused and you said, is that really good enough for you?
Yeah, right.
And I think that is the question, especially in our society.
Yeah.
Is it good enough just to know
Yeah.
that you're doing what God wants you to do,
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
whether
Yeah.
you have comfort or not, whether you have pain or not.
Yeah, that's right.
So
That's right.
we're just about out of time. Got
Okay.
one thing that I'd
Okay.
like for you to address
Okay.
that I thought was profound. You took us back, here we are wrapping up Genesis.
Yeah.
So Genesis opens with the first murder,
Yeah,
Cain and Abel.
right.
And God addresses Cain, and his response is, "Am I my brother's keeper?"
Yeah.
And then put the other book in, speaking of chiastic elements
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
What was your observation about Joseph? I just thought that was beautiful.
Well, so, Cain kills his brother and says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Joseph's brothers try to kill him. And at the end, Joseph gets to a place where he's both capable of caring for them and desiring to care for them. So Cain asks rhetorically, and Joseph actually, this is another way that he's a great picture of Jesus, right? But says, "Don't worry, I'll take care of you."
Yeah.
And I was just saying, man, that bugged me. It really, really bugged me, because I know that whenever I go through a painful season, I want the resolution and the blessing to be for me.
Wow.
And I hated, if I'm honest, that he didn't say a word about himself.
Yeah.
God meant it for good, and then he talks about being able to care for all these people, and it says that he spoke kindly to them and comforted their heart. So he basically says, God did all of this to me for you. Which is also another great picture of Jesus. But it bothered me, because I thought to myself, would I go through some of the seasons that God has brought me through if I knew it was for somebody else?
And had he been revengeful, he was powerless in prison,
Yeah.
powerless when he was sold into slavery.
Yeah.
But when they finally reconnected, he had the power to have had them killed instantly, or at the very least inflicted even more pain than he had experienced.
And that is,
Yeah.
I mean, I would have loved to have hung on this rim, but that is, when you talk about the sovereign timing of God, right? That he did not arrive in that position before his character could uphold it.
Yeah.
Because if snotty little Joseph
Yeah.
had been second in Egypt, all those guys are headless.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And yet, that's the beautiful thing about this guy, is to attribute it to God,
Yeah.
and B, be in a position to say, yeah, God took me through all of these things to care for you, and I want to, and I will, even though I have the ability now to do what you actually deserve,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
But I'm not going to give it to you, and to see that many times God takes us through seasons to enlarge us for someone else's blessing.
And you set that up today by saying on the pathway to purpose,
Yeah.
the temptations were pain and power.
Yeah, right.
And
yeah.
I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up for
Yeah,
today.
yeah.
So much more that I'd like to
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
about,
yeah, me too.
as always.
Yeah.
But thank you for joining us today, and hope that you enjoyed Let's Talk. And we will be right back here at the same time next week.
Thanks for tuning into the Graceway Experience. Hope we can talk again sometime.